Joining me now from Calgary is Carlo Dade. He's director of the Center on Trade and Investment Policy at the Canada West Foundation. So, Carlo, are you as optimistic given this Friday deadline?
Sure, because the Friday deadline, as far as you can tell from analyzing all the facts here, really isn't any more a real deadline than any of the dozen or two other dozen absolute deadlines that have come and gone. The Friday deadline is to get an agreement that the current Mexican president can sign. But there is no reason whatsoever, other than perhaps ego, that the current Mexican president has to sign the agreement. The incoming Mexican president's negotiating team is sitting at the table with the current Mexican government's negotiating team. The incoming team has no problems with the agreement, neither does the incoming Mexican president, and it'll probably be easier getting it through the incoming Mexican Congress than the U.S. Congress. So there really is no Friday deadline.
But that being said, does Canada feel that pressure? Did it feel left out when it saw what happened between the U.S. and Mexico coming together this week?
I don't think so. Canada and Mexico have been working very closely together during the negotiations. Our current government lifted a visa on Mexicans coming to Canada that was imposed by the previous government. From that point on, relations have been very close. They've been exchanging negotiating positions. Our foreign minister talks to the Mexican economy minister. Our negotiator talks to the Mexican negotiator almost all the time. So we wouldn't be surprised by anything that was on the table. It was good that Mexico and the U.S. got their issues out of the way, and it just leaves, as you mentioned in the lead-in, supply management. And you've done our government a favor by forcing their hand on supply management. They can now go to the Canadian public and say, look, we said we would never get rid of supply management, but at the end it was the last issue and we really had no choice. So I would argue that this actually worked out fairly well for us.
We did see some agreement on autos and labor. What would you say are the sticking points that remain? Because we did hear Canada's foreign minister say that there were some intense moments on Wednesday during negotiations.
Sure. The exact nature of the sunset clause. Now, we and Mexico have said no to a sunset clause, but the reality is the U.S. has a sunset clause in their World Trade Organization agreement. Were the Americans to adopt something like that for NAFTA, I don't see it being an issue. It's not an issue with the WTO. It wouldn't be an issue with NAFTA. Intellectual property has some sticking points, government procurement, but these are not things on which Donald Trump has campaigned and spent time in front of rallies and the U.S. media. So they're amenable to behind-the-scenes negotiation. What we haven't seen, though, is progressive trade. You may remember that when we started these negotiations, the Canadian government said NAFTA must contain a gender clause, it must contain a chapter on Indigenous rights. Those issues have quietly disappeared, which is great news for potential future negotiations with China, whom I'm sure are watching these and taking note.
Indeed. So, Carlo, very quickly, do you see a scenario where Canada does not come together with the United States and we see separate agreements and no NAFTA?
Well, I see the administration potentially, the U.S. administration potentially trying that. But Congress was very specific when they handed the administration permission and instructions on negotiating NAFTA. It was to negotiate a trilateral agreement. If you read the letter from the administration to Congress and Congress's granting a permission, there is nothing in there about separate bilateral agreements. I don't think the administration can convince the Senate and Congress to change the TPA authorization. So that threat, to me, rings hollow, especially if you listen to senators like Ron Wyden, Sherrod Brown, Democrats, Republicans across the aisle saying, no, we gave you instructions for a trilateral agreement. We didn't give you permission to negotiate a bilateral.
All right, great to hear your thoughts. Carlo Dade in Calgary, thank you.